The story begins with this guy who gets a bright idea for a dry eye drop. It all starts with the stuff he wants to make this dry eye drop from. He knows this is an incredibly marketable idea. It's very vogue, it's very timely, it tells a great story, and he has in mind just the right audience. Actually, he's tried this out already in 3 different other areas of medicine, and it didn't work out all that well, but he has every reason to believe that dry eye is going to be the market where this stuff is a blockbuster success. Now, it's an eye drop, and all eye drops are regulated by the FDA to some extent, right? There's basically 2 paths through the FDA if you're an eye drop. Path number 1 is a prescription drug. You go through clinical trials. That means actual science, where you figure out if things are safe. Like, have we tried this on enough human guinea pigs to know the worst that can happen when people use it and how often that happens? Another purpose of clinical trials is to make sure things actually work, at least for somebody, because, the placebo effect and all that. So that's path number 1. Path number 2 is over-the-counter drugs, what we call OTC. That path only works if your eye drop fits into a very small box. It has to meet some incredibly specific parameters. If it does, awesome. You basically just have to follow a whole bunch of really tedious rules, but it's pretty much on the honor system. So with OTC drops, your eye drops aren't approved per se. They're just very, very obedient, we hope. So let's go back to our dry eye drop dude with his great idea. The substance he wants to make his eye drop from is definitely something that requires path number 1, the full-blown process, the science, the clinical trials, the years of painstaking work. There is absolutely no question of his idea fitting into path number 2 as an over-the-counter drop. Not only that, but it's actually a very special kind of substance that the FDA has an eagle eye on, because this substance comes from other people's body parts. The FDA cares about other people's body parts for lots of reasons, like risk of disease transmission if you're not using tested safety science. Another reason the FDA cares is because there's an awful lot of charlatans out there turning body parts into sludge or snake oil for fun and profit, and sometimes they accidentally end up killing people in the process, like you read about in the newspaper. And this guy knows that. He knows there's this thing called a biologics license. He knows you're required by law to have that biologics license before you start selling your dry eye goo made from other people's body parts. He also knows it takes real science to get a biologics license. This other company called Dompe actually did that a couple years ago. And he knows nobody's ever really tried to do real science with his particular kind of dry eye goo. And he has no interest whatsoever in doing real science because, among other things like costs, that actually bears the risk that you might accidentally even prove that it doesn't work. So he decides to just skip all that nonsense and go straight to the fun part, selling. Now, I almost said that the fun part was bottling and selling. Then I remember this guy is not really that keen on the bottling part, so he skimps. He finds some cheapo little bottles. Those fancy bottling technologies that are designed to keep preservative-free eye drops sterile, they're just too expensive and complicated. It's not necessary. I mean, how many people get infections from preservative-free eye drops? Do you know? I don't know. In fact, he's so reluctant to spend money on packaging that he won't put neck seals on the bottles. And apparently, ink is a little too expensive too, because he doesn't care to print things like an ingredient list or storage instructions. On the other hand, he has no problem freely spending electronic ink. He figures out a very clever way to register his dry eye goo online with the FDA as OTC drops, and no one seems to notice. They also don't notice that in that OTC registration, he uses different labels, different boxes, different information, and you guessed it, different ingredients than what he's actually selling. And nobody notices. And all that careful economy is for one purpose, reserving the budget for marketing. He puts his head together with some smart people. I mean really smart people. And he comes up with a smart marketing plan. I mean a really smart marketing plan. An out-of-this-world smart marketing plan. And I suspect, though we haven't actually gotten to the bottom of this part of the story yet, I suspect he also put his money together with some other people's money. Anyway, before you know it, key opinion leader doctors are writing about his new dry eye goo in all the trade journals, in optometry and ophthalmology. These doctors are adding his new dry eye goo to their lecture slides. They're talking about his new dry eye goo to their peers. And before you know it, ordinary dry eye doctors of all descriptions all over the country are recommending this new dry eye goo to their dry eye patients that have worked through everything else on the list. And some of them are selling this new dry eye goo to their patients. And a lot of them are talking about this dry eye goo to their peers. And all this time, no one seems to be aware that these eye drops require and do not have FDA approval prior to being legally marketed. And all this time, nobody seems to be aware that there's never been a single clinical trial conducted or a single study published in a reputable journal. And all this time, nobody seems to be aware that these eye drops are virtually always described as prescription drugs, but lo and behold, you can't buy them in a drugstore. And all this time, no one seems to be aware that these eye drops are stored at room temperature, but they're made of substances that we know from well-established science will basically turn to sludge very quickly if stored at room temperature. And all this time, nobody seems to be aware that there's no list of ingredients for these eye drops. So if I have allergies, I won't know if it contains something I'm allergic to. And nobody seems to be aware that these are the only preservative-free eye drops on the market that aren't packaged the way preservative-free eye drops are supposed to be packaged. Except for one other lookalike biologic drop that's made by another company that copied this guy's idea, but that's another story for another day and another video series. Anyway, and also, nobody seems to be aware that these are the only biologic eye drugs on the market that are not stored like a biologic eye drug, like autologous serum or oxervate. There is a reason why biologics have to be stored in the freezer. And all this time, nobody seems to be aware that this company, when asked directly about their eye drops' regulatory approval status, has at least 5 different scripts available, each one equally false and misleading. And all this time, nobody seems to be aware that this company has been saying they make their eye drops from placenta, but their patent says it's amniotic fluid. And they've been registered with the FDA as an amniotic membrane processor until they let that registration lapse. And then they entered the big league and they re-registered as a drug manufacturing establishment, even though they are neither OTC nor prescription, and even though this is the only product they make, and their phone people will tell you when you ask that their eye drops aren't drugs at all, and therefore don't require approval, in which case I'm not sure why they call themselves a drug manufacturing establishment to the FDA, other than to keep up this beautiful facade that they are, in some sense, in someone's imagination somewhere, actually being regulated by the FDA, even though they seem to be saying to other people, including doctors, that they're not subject to regulation because their products are biologic. And this goes on and on and on and on and on until Rebecca's head simply explodes. And the moral of this story is, it is amazing what you can get away with if you have the guts to tell big enough lies. Hi, by the way, I am Rebecca at the Dry Eye Foundation. In my next video, I'm going to explain what this is really all about and why, and I'm going to give you a rough sketch of the pieces of the puzzle that I'm going to be picking apart in this video series. Until then, your homework is to go to biologiceyedrops.org, click on the video thing or the watch and learn, whatever it is, and watch Placentas from Strangers, parts 1 and 2 in our video library. Placentas from Strangers is part of a series of presentations created by an ophthalmologist who is a longtime colleague and friend of mine and is my research partner on this project. And if you think a presentation by an ophthalmologist is likely to be too dry, I'm telling you, the only dry thing about this ophthalmologist's content is her sense of humor. We've been working on this for 3 months, and it's been brutal and maddening and depressing and frustrating and a whole lot of other things. And I just got to say, when we're dealing with something this complicated and upsetting, we deserve to extract as much fun out of it as we possibly can, and so do you. So that's all for now. Actually, one more quick thing. If you're interested in what I have to say about this, but you're afraid that you'll get tired of looking at my face, or you think I can't be trusted to brush up my non-existent video editing skills quickly enough for all the show and tell that I'm going to need to do, you might want to chip in a few bucks to our technology fund. You can use the donation link on any of our websites like dryeyefoundation.org or biologiceyedrops.org. Or hey, better yet, if you are a hotshot video editor and would like to volunteer your services, give me a call, 800-484-0244. Bye for now.